People say you are what you eat. If that's true, then a whole lot of people in this country and across the Western world are built out of strange ingredients, all manner of stuff consumed by billions of people every day, but that few, if paying attention, would recognise as food, by which I mean natural whole food, because it's not food, not in the natural sense at least. If you are what you eat, then most are made of ingredients they couldn't name, things that didn't grow in fields, that never had a heartbeat, that never walked, swam or flew. Just as we build our bodies from the food we eat, so we build our understanding of the world from other things we take in. Information, in the form of things we read, things we see, things we're told by those we trust. If too many have had their stomachs filled with God knows what, building their bodies with rubbish for the most part, waste materials from industrial processes, chemical cocktails cooked to taste like something they're not, things never intended to be eaten by man or beast, then at least as many more have had their heads filled to bursting too, with more fakery, toxic fakery, concocted nonsense made palatable with more artificial flavouring. I'm minded to say doctored, meaning to falsify, to disguise, to adulterate. An interesting word all on its own, but I digress. Instead of eating real whole food, too many eat fake food now. Things that didn't exist in any form at all until the last 100 years or so. Things made of ingredients doctored until human beings can be persuaded to swallow them and keep them down. And at the same time, rather than building an understanding of the world as it really is, too many are leaving the truth out of their lives entirely and swallowing lies instead. Lies doctored until they pass for something wholesome. Part of the truth that's missing from too many diets is that the swallowing of fake food and lies is nothing new, that people have been drinking the Kool-ade for real and metaphorically for a long time. The first entirely synthetic, wholly fake food was coal butter, which is exactly what it sounds like, exactly as it ought to have said on the tin, but didn't, of course. An edible sludge made from coal and dyed yellow so it could be passed off as something a human being might eat. Coal butter was whipped up by a German food chemist, Arthur Imhausen. During the Second World War, Nazi Germany needed to produce as much food and fuel as possible from within its own borders. From its huge reserves of low-quality coal called lignite, a way was found to make liquid fuel and also explosives, vital in wartime obviously, as well as soap. Imhausen took the same raw material used to make the soap, being what we know as paraffin wax, and found a way to make it into a fat that could be dyed and flavoured until it might be passed off as a kind of butter, edible by human beings. The companies that grew fat from the innovations like all that fuel, soap and butter included IG Farben, once the largest chemical and pharmaceutical company in the world. During the 1940s, IG Farben tested that butter on thousands of souls from concentration camps like Auschwitz. Data found after the war, the result of testing that was not made public at the time, revealed prolonged consumption of coal butter led to kidney disease. Dogs wouldn't touch the stuff. But since it was mostly to be given to U-boat crews, men with life expectancies in wartime of just a couple of months, no one was much bothered about the long-term effects of them eating fake butter. A subsidiary of IG Farben supplied the Zyklon B poison gas used to murder more than 1 million Jewish people in Auschwitz. The artificial sweetener we know as saccharin is another product made 100 years ago from more coal. You are what you eat, remember? This is what big government and big business thinks of the likes of you and me. At least Marie Antoinette is supposed to have wanted the poor folk to eat not coal but cake. Let them hear lies is also nearer the mark. Tell them anything our governments clearly think and they'll swallow it right down. For as long as I can remember, we've been being frightened away from the good stuff, which is to say the truth and also healthy food. I'm of the vintage that grew up being sold the low-fat lifestyle, low-fat spreads instead of butter. Remember the Nazis and all that coal made yellow and spreadable, spongy white bread that lasts for days without going stale, the insistence that eggs are bad news, best avoided, go low-fat and high-carb, and always more and more ultra-processed gunk for reheating in the microwave. On and on and on, leaving out the good stuff and replacing it with pap and gruel. Cereals were food for livestock until farmers in the US had a glut of the stuff year on year in the early 20th century. in the years before the dust bowl of the grapes of wrath ravaged the farmland anyway. But what to do with all that surplus cereal? Way more than the livestock herds required. And then along came the breakfast cereal industry and the notion that while meat and fat stimulated unwholesome and unwanted lusts and desires, cereals would dampen all that down and create a more passive, peaceable, lustless population, and the rest of the cattle cake repurposed for the poor. As well as a diet of cereal and low-fat fake butter and the rest, it has been a diet of lies about health and so much more. Vegetable is a word that makes us think healthy thoughts, and so vegetable oils sound like a healthy alternative to animal fats like real butter, tallow and lard. But vegetable oils, canola oil, sunflower oil, palm oil and the rest, started life as cheap lubricants for farm machinery, rancid in their raw state, foul-smelling and as far from appetising as it's possible to get. It was only the advent of processes by which those industrial byproducts might be clarified, made palatable, that they could be bottled and then set on supermarket shelves as fit for human consumption. For years we've been bombarded with claims that veganism will save the world. There's nothing green about that agenda. Notions like flying an avocado halfway around the world rather than eating something grown in a field up the road, somehow promising a brighter future. And have you had a look at the lists of ingredients on so-called plant-based foods? Well, the ingredients for a decent beef burger are, well, beef and maybe some salt and pepper. The ingredients for a plant-based burger offering read more like an A to Z for an explosive chemistry experiment. Most recently, we've had the spectre of insects for protein, and so a future of great barns filled with critters bred by the billions for rendering into yet more burgers utterly devoid of beef. Swarms of locusts, hothoused, what could possibly go wrong? And then the promise of lab-grown meat, a Frankenstein creation in my opinion, animal cells resultant from a biopsy harvested from living tissue and then coddled in a nutrient bath until fibres form that mimic the texture of flesh. I say this comes from a place of contempt, from a contemptuous view of our species, held by a powerful, wealthy few, that fake and false is good enough for the likes of us. Everything else has been made so expensive, all but out of reach, rent, energy, the other stuff of life, that now in the West of all places, the so-called developed West of Britain and the US, the mass of the populations can afford to spend no more than 10% of their incomes, half that amount if possible, on the food they might put inside their bodies, inside the bodies of their children. Everything else is almost too expensive to buy, but life itself is as cheap as chips deep fried in oil, little better than toxic waste. And all the while we're fed this crap, we receive a serving of lies on the side. All the nonsense about the so-called pandemic, about the safety and efficacy of the jabs, about the war in Ukraine, about the climate, about the Middle East, all that fakery and falsehood. Farmers across the world are fighting a land grab, a state-sponsored effort to force them off their fields so those fields might be repurposed for who knows what, but certainly not for growing wholesome food. Bill Gates, no scientist he, no doctor, but influencing the healthcare of billions on account only of his wealth, is now the largest private landowner in the US, more than 250,000 acres and counting, and he's no farmer either. In the UK, it will shortly be illegal to harbour so much as a single fugitive chicken in your back garden, for meat and eggs are just as pets, unless each is registered with the state. I say the relentless push behind this move and the rest of the war on agriculture is to widen the already yawning chasm between people and their understanding of healthy food. Never mind the ability to actually access it. And that's before the sinister threat of mRNA jabs for livestock and other foods, and more Frankenstein sprays to extend the shelf life of everything else. You are what you eat, and you're also what you understand. I've come to understand that nothing in recent times is about public health, if by that you mean an intention to keep people healthy. The last thing people needed during the times of a respiratory illness was to be shut indoors, barred from keeping fit, gyms closed while the fast food outlets remained open. Never a word about healthy food, far less the benefits of supplements as cheap and readily available as vitamin D, proven to help keep people well in the face of all ills. I say the preferred option of the state is a population made fat and sick by poor food and unhealthy lifestyles, and then propped up by fabulously expensive drugs of unproven and uncertain safety from Big Pharma. The lies are everywhere. Liars lie about everything after all. The snake oil salesmen are everywhere. This week I watched so-called Foreign Secretary David Cameron and US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken address a press conference. Furrowed brows, hands clasped. I watched their lips moving. Cameron actually described Ukraine as value for money, an investment that had not cost the life of a single US serviceman, somehow forgetting the 500,000 dead Ukrainian men and boys. Neither would commit to ending arms sales to Israel. Cameron talked about more money for NATO as a 75th birthday present. Kerching, kerching. Here's the thing, if it's not the vegetable oils and the lab meat and the rest of the fake food and the clamp down on healthy living that's made you and yours sick these years past, then the lies from those in positions of authority must surely make your gorge rise. Pass the sick bag. That's right. Make your gorge rise. Pass the sick bag. I'm joined this week by journalist, presenter and friend Jasmine Birtles. Hi, Jasmine.
Hello there.
Thanks for being here. I don't know about you, but I look out now at the people around me and they don't look well.
No.
In a way that I was never previously aware of. Do you sense the same?
Yeah, well, I know what you mean, but, you know, like you, I was brought up with the low-fat diet, etc. I mean, when I was a child, we had a lot of food from the garden. My mum cooked from raw and all that. But we also had cakes made with margarine. We had quite a lot of margarine around. Ate butter, but a lot of margarine. Angel Delight, goodness knows what. I mean, that's pure chemicals, you know, let's be honest. Fish paste, meat paste, you know, there was all sorts of rubbish. And I do remember meeting some Americans and thinking they looked a lot healthier than we did. But I agree that right now we have a level of, for example, obesity that was not seen for a moment when I was growing up. I mean, really only in the last, I guess, 30 years.
And there's a kind of it's a pallor.
Yes.
About people.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. You know, people grossly overweight are now everywhere where they used to be, you know, eye-catchingly rare within my lifetime.
Yeah, me too.
But there's a kind of a greyness,
yes,
a moistness, I don't know, that people just in increasing numbers look careworn and anxious and just not well.
And I think you're right to mix the actual food and the lies that we are, as you say, swallowing, because much of it is mental. I mean, we're going to talk about all sorts of different diets, I know, and I've been very interested to hear people who are absolutely determined and absolutely 100% convinced that their diet is the one, and many of them are diametrically opposed, you know, veganism and, you know, meat only, all of that. And you do find quite often that those who are completely convinced do look a bit more healthy than those who aren't convinced.
Don't you think that whether people do decide, and however they go about deciding whether they'll be vegan or they'll only eat meat or some variation in between, that it's the very act of engagement that probably is making a big part of contributing to their being better in every way, because they're switched on, paying attention and thinking and acting positively rather than just being on the receiving end of whatever they're given.
Yes, and as you say, being on the receiving end, this sort of passivity, this sense of helplessness that we've had, I think, for years. I mean, you mentioned the cold butter, which I'd never heard of, but also in the Victorian times, apparently Victorian bakers would put sawdust in the bread to, you know, as you do. I mean, why wouldn't you?
At least sawdust is a natural product.
Yes, well, yes, there is that. I think that's probably what they said. It's a natural product, whatever. And that contributed to child mortality, apparently, in certain areas. Yeah. So, you know, it's happened all the time, but it's happening, I think, on an industrial scale now. We're finding everything's got chemicals in. There was a piece in the Mail just recently saying that strawberries are the worst for having all sorts of long-term chemicals in them. And I love strawberries. And, you know, it's not even manufactured. This is strawberries.
What I want to get to across the next, hour or couple of hours is whether or not there's any kind of intent. I have begun to wonder if a sick, overweight, weakened population, and also miseducated and all of the rest of it, isn't simply easier to deal with and that you've got constant profit. I mean, a patient cured is a customer lost.
Yes, it is. And if I put my money hat on, as you know, I'm a financial journalist, something I talk about a lot now is pensions and the very shaky future of them, because, as you know, we and all the Western countries have massively overprinted money. We are hugely indebted, and a large amount of that is to pay the state pensions. And, you know, there are a few ways that you can combat the state pension problem. You can either do what we are doing now and just make it that you have to be older and older and older to get the state pension. Or you have a lot of immigration, because it's the working immigrants who are paying, who would help to pay for the state pension. Or you just kill them off, just kill off the old people.
I know where my money is.